PTSD is a thing that you need to get to survive in Afghanistan.
Wow.
So we call it hypervigilance, we call it hyperarousal. I would call it situational awareness, and you're rewarded for situational awareness. If you are situationally aware, now you would spot the IEDs, and if you spotted the IED, not only did you feel great that you saved your buddies' lives, we gave you a Navy Achievement Medal. Behavioral conditioning process has been the same for thousands of years. How do you make warriors? From the Spartans to now, we shave your head, take away your name, and make you a part of a team where you're interchangeable. And I had a Vietnam veteran peer support that I used to work with, and his analogy was very similar. And he said, when you get out of the Army, it's like they kick you out of a moving vehicle straight into a knife fight. Maybe I should become a police officer. Maybe I should do these things because that may ease me into transitioning into being a civilian. Now, the challenge is that I will never assimilate. The behavioral conditioning is so significant and strong that it's unrealistic to expect that somebody who's been through all of that is just going to shut that part of themselves off.
Raw, uncut, and unapologetic. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness.
Welcome back, everyone. Today, we welcome Dr. Varpas de Sa Pereira, a U.S. Marine veteran. And I specifically say U.S. Marine veteran because for those Marines out there, know that there are no former or ex-Marines. And he's also a USASOC special operator, former USASOC special operator, and now a clinical psychologist who has dedicated his life to understanding and addressing the psychological challenges faced by combat veterans. After serving multiple tours in Iraq, Dr. de Sa Pereira experienced firsthand the difficulties of reintegration into civilian life. And trust me, Doc, I get that too. So we're definitely going to have a good conversation. Varpas's journey led him to coin the term, and this one hits deep, warrior withdrawal syndrome, encapsulating the struggle many veterans face when transitioning from the structured, purpose-driven environment of combat to the complexities of civilian life. In his book, Warrior Withdrawal, when BAMF, B-A-M-F, no longer means badass mother effer, he combines personal narratives with clinical insights to shed light on this phenomenon and offers guidance for veterans and their loved ones navigating this challenging transition. And I love the piece there, Varpas, and I hope you're comfortable with me calling you just Varpas or Doc. Yeah. All right, we'll go with that. I didn't cover that beforehand. So that last piece, that's a critical piece that I think so many, when they talk about transition, miss, is that piece for the loved ones and navigating that piece. So we're definitely going to get into that. But I don't know if you've ever watched the show before, but it's Men Talking Mindfulness. So we like to start it off with a grounding practice. So I hope you'll join me in that. And welcome to the show, by the way. I didn't even say that. So welcome, Varpas.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, pleasure to have you. So let's get into that one breath grounding practice. Go ahead for you, Doc, and for those listening or watching later. Let's tune into our bodies just by noticing where we are in this time, in this space, grounding your feet on the floor. And if closing your eyes is available and comfortable to you, then I offer that to you. Otherwise, just soften your eyelids and let's bring our attention to our breath, just noticing it and beginning with a nice exhale, letting that all out. Holding empty for a second, and then a nice, long, slow, deep breath in, holding full at the top, and letting that go, letting that go, letting that go. And bring some movement back into the body, maybe wiggling some fingers, wiggling your toes, rolling your neck around. All right. And again, welcome to the show for those listening and watching. And Varpas, welcome again. So let's just jump right in, man. So your journey from the battlefield to therapist, I know a few people who have made that, but it's not the traditional transition. What motivated you to pursue this career afterwards, after your military service?
So that's a tricky question because in some ways I fell into this career instead of actually directly seeking it out. I retired, kind of go through some of the challenges of the transition. My last unit was very involved in dealing with people, especially with a complicated assessment and selection. And as I was transitioning out, I thought that this might be something that I could do, like be a strategic debriefer. And so one of the last things that I did while on active duty was I went to the FBI's crisis negotiator course down there in Quantico.
Nice.
And so I thought, well, I can do this. I thrive in chaos. And, I was able to talk guys into shooting at bad people and putting them in harm's way. Perhaps I can talk guys into, putting the rifle down or the shotgun down when they're barricaded with a victim. What I found, though, is because of liability, you can't just do that job. And so, unfortunately, even with the FBI, typically the negotiators, it's like it's not their primary function. It's usually a supplemental duty. So your guy who works the docks as a patrolman is also your crisis negotiator, and they have no space for somebody who's just qualified and would be willing to do it full time. So I couldn't do that. Didn't know what I was going to do. Went back into contracting for my old unit. Did some ANSs and some evaluations at OTC. And then I got to talking to the operational psychologist there. And he said that the guys here will talk to you in a way that they'll never talk to me. You've been on the sand. You've been, everywhere where they've been. You've walked the same walk, and they'll open up to you in a way that they won't with me. So that plus the only way that I'd get on the crisis negotiation teams would be as a psychologist. I was like, all right, let me try this out. And then very quickly, once I started school, I realized that the analogy I like to use is adults are like fully baked cakes. And so part of therapy is you have to like unbake the cake. And I was like, I'm not interested in unbaking cakes. That's very difficult to do. Let me work with kids, right? So part of my work there at USASOC and even in straight leg infantry was you try to get to the left of the boom. And so in my mind, getting to the left of the boom with maladaptive coping skills would be start working with kids. And so I moved into child psychology.
Nice.
Did that for a few years. It comes with its own challenges. And then when it came time for doing internship, I kind of mixed child with adult. And then that I talk about it in the beginning of the book. I went to a paddle pass, basically retirement ceremony for a good Marine friend. And in chatting with one of the spouses there, some of the other guys there, that kind of relit that flame that, hey, I need to sort this out. What is this problem that we have when we get out that nothing feels right?
So that is the warrior withdrawal syndrome.
That's right.
So can you explain what this entails and how it differs from, I don't know, PTSD,
Yeah.
The post-combat psychological challenges or other, how does it compare or contrast to other post-combat psychological challenges?
Yeah. So once that fire got relit, I went to the VA and said, hey, here's a cluster of symptoms that I see. Here's a cluster of symptoms that I had. It was communication challenges, feeling like you have a loss of identity, a loss of sense of purpose. Typically, as you're being observed, it will look like anger management issues. Sometimes it will be, you'll be called emotionally unstable or just unstable, and a whole bunch of other things that sometimes will look like and are often diagnosed as adjustment disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder. So kind of in working through this, and I had wanted to make this my dissertation, was to define this thing. And they're like, well, there's no research out on that. And I said, yeah, this would be a qualitative analysis. Let me do it, talk to some guys. Unfortunately, that didn't manifest, so it had to become the book. And in order to do that, I started working at the VA. And I had originally thought, based off of books like Operator Syndrome or the research article.
That was my next question, was Operator Syndrome, how are those two different? So
right.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. So when I was a resident or postdoc at the VA, I was looking at Operator Syndrome, and I was looking at just the mental health piece and thinking about how what I'm looking at is in that narrow focus. And then as soon as I started working at the VA, I noticed that I had thought that this only affects operators, that this was a combat-related thing. And I started to see that this was happening to veterans who had never deployed to combat. There were some veterans who didn't deploy at all. And then very quickly I saw that I have to change my hypothesis for what this is. So my hypothesis was kind of along the lines of operator syndrome, where multiple deployments, multiple times of getting put into harm's way, multiple tours, seeing all this stuff puts a high burden on a person to survive. And then once all that's removed, we have problems. What I was seeing was a little bit different. And then this gets to answer your question about how does it differ from other diagnoses. So I gave a talk in Austin recently about this, where there's 5 criteria generally for post-traumatic stress disorder. The first is exposure to trauma. The second is re-experiencing. So that's sort of your nightmares, flashbacks. The third is avoidance of things that remind you of the event. The fourth is kind of negative thoughts about yourself, negative emotions, like I should have done better. I could have zigged instead of zagged.
Right.
And then the fifth is this hyperarousal, which sometimes we'll call hypervigilance. So in the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual, PTSD is really kind of written for an index trauma, like a unique traumatic event. And so if I have a car accident, then, and I was just listening to you talking with Jocko, and he's kind of going through this with prolonged exposure. If you have a car accident, you can use prolonged exposure to help that person out to overcome that PTSD, because they have, somebody may have died in a car accident. So there's the trauma. They have nightmares about it. They don't want to drive at all. They don't want to be around cars. So that's the avoidance piece. They feel bad about themselves. Like, if I was a better driver, I wouldn't have hit that other car. And then finally, they're very hyper alert around vehicles, even as a passenger. So prolonged exposure helps you overcome that one event, and kind of like taking the kid to the river,
Right.
Jocko's example. It's like, okay, well, you put the person next to a car, and then you touch the car, sit in the passenger seat, sit in the driver's seat, turn it on, drive it down the driveway, then around the block, and the next thing you know, you're on the highway again.
Right.
The challenge, though, is how that doesn't necessarily fit for most veterans. And it's a little bit of, well, pick your trauma. And if you have an operator, it's like, well, I have 8 tours, multiple traumas. How do I pick which
Right.
field capture mission, we're talking about? And then back to what I was saying before about just working at the VA. I mean, I have veteran patients who didn't deploy, didn't do a detachment, all the way down to, my MOS was the tuba player for the band, and I still have these symptoms. It's like, okay, so I have to refigure this stuff out. So PTSD, is there a unique trauma? So that's a differentiator. There may not be, which isn't to say that if there's one IED strike in Afghanistan that's constantly causing you to have nightmares, this is more, we're in the classic realm of PTSD, and we have evidence-based practices for that. What I'm describing is not mutually exclusive from that. These things can coexist. But that's the trauma piece. Then the second is, a lot of these guys don't have the nightmares or flashbacks. They don't necessarily come up. And sometimes, even if they do, it's like a heuristic where, when I'm feeling anxious about tomorrow's presentation at work, my brain remembers the last time I was anxious was when I was doing PCCs and PCIs to get ready to go out on patrol. And so that's the nightmare that I have, irrespective of what I'm actually stressed about, because that's the shortcut that my brain uses. The third one then is avoidance. What I found is I don't avoid, and I talk about that a lot in the book. I had an affinity. I sought more. One tour in Iraq was not enough. Volunteered to go back. 2 tours in Iraq was not enough. Anti-terrorism was not enough. I wanted to go back. And so, it's kind of polar opposites sometimes, where when they had the military transition teams, you couldn't get volunteers, but I was volunteering for that. And it's like, don't put me behind a computer. I'm here to go work with 11 other Americans and 200 Iraqis. That's what I want to do.
Right.
Still not enough, which led me to climbing the spear all the way to the tip. And that was still not enough. So if I had, if I had PTSD in the classic sense, and it was clustered around, let's say, the first time I got hit with artillery, then I would not continue to seek out combat tours. So it's like a counterindicator with respect to avoidance. The negative cognitions and emotions and the hyperarousal. So sometimes I'll say, like, when you go to basic training, we actually train you into PTSD. I quote this, the young Lance Corporal in the book, where PTSD is a thing that you need to get to survive in Afghanistan.
Wow.
So we call it hypervigilance. We call it hyperarousal. I would call it situational awareness. And you're rewarded for situational awareness. If you are situationally aware, if you got your 5s and 25s, you spot, and this bore out in Helmand Province. If you did your 5s and 25s, if we slowed the vehicles down, now you would spot the IEDs. And if you spotted the IED, not only did you feel great that you saved your buddy's lives, we gave you a Navy Achievement Medal.
Yeah, for the audience, can you just explain what the 5x25 is?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, when you're stopping your vehicles, you're going to look 5 meters out first and see, if there's anything there that might be disturbed or different. And then you're going to look 25 meters out to see if there's anything out there.
The piece that you touch on, a couple pieces there that I want to talk about, is the fact that, there are some who didn't deploy. I ran a podcast before called Veterans Path for a nonprofit that I was working with. And one of my guests had never deployed, but he struggled from essentially, for lack of a better term, survivor's guilt. Like, he had gone to Japan when some of his Marine Corps brothers had gone to Iraq and Afghanistan, and some of them had died. And I can totally understand where, people may ask him, well, you're struggling with something, but you never deployed. What's the deal? Well, sometimes as a warrior, that's something you seek out, right? You said going to Iraq once wasn't enough, going twice wasn't enough, going to the next level of the tip of the spear wasn't enough. It's almost the warrior within is seeking that battle to fight. And if you don't have it, is that where the withdrawal comes? Or do you have to have had the battle to experience that withdrawal?
Right. So what I would say is you don't have to have had the battle per se. Like, you don't have to go to combat, because that's what the data bore out while I was at the VA.
Right.
That last criteria that I didn't cover with PTSD is that negative cognitions, which is, and this comes into this answer here, is what I refine my hypothesis to be, is that basic training, entry-level training, boot camp, MOS producing school, is sufficient to indoctrinate you into this warrior culture. And so part of that is, again, we're inculcating these negative cognitions. So you aren't a person, you are a Marine. You don't exist. You take away your name, we shave your head. And in reality, this behavioral conditioning process has been the same for thousands of years. How do you make warriors? From the Spartans to now, we shave your head, take away your name, and make you a part of a team where you're interchangeable.
Right.
To cause you to believe that I am interchangeable. Although that kind of causes dissonance, because you don't feel interchangeable. So I have to be the one who deploys. And if I'm not the one who deploys, then that causes some of the what you call survivor's guilt. The challenge that I have there at the VA is that this exists at every level. I have not met anyone. I have, friends who have lost limbs, and they still also don't believe they did enough. Nobody has ever done enough.
Yeah. Almost every SEAL that I speak to, when we kind of sit around when nobody else is listening, it's just the two of us, three of us, we're like, yeah, we didn't do enough. There's very few that have ever said, yeah, I did enough. Right. And now that you say what you just said, the warrior withdrawal syndrome, that makes much more sense. If it were specifically combat, then it would be combat withdrawal syndrome, right? Or something to that effect. And like you said, the operator syndrome. So with combat, or more generally with being a military member and being made that Marine, being made that soldier, being made that sailor or airman, when we leave and we have this clarity of purpose in the military, but then we leave and we kind of lose that clarity of purpose, how can that impact one's mental health?
So that causes, and this is the solution that I had, was basically to, because PTSD doesn't seem to fit, adjustment disorder doesn't seem to fit. The only thing that I could make fit was this idea of substance abuse. And so I can't define the substance for anybody. And it's up to you to sort of figure out what drew me into the military. What was I getting out of it? And yet that explains the affinity and the lifelong challenges with constantly feeling drawn back into whatever that thing is. What draws the Navy SEAL or the SF guy back into going to Afghanistan to rescue interpreters, or Ukraine to just fight for what's right. What that means then, to answer your question, is when you get out, so not only are you expelled from the warrior culture into a culture that doesn't necessarily want you, you're also losing your connection to that substance, which is why I deliberately call it withdrawal. So withdrawal in the substance abuse symptoms is like you start to have problems associated with not taking the substance anymore. So if I'm an alcoholic, for example, and I go cold turkey, I start to have shakes, I start to have other problems.
Right.
And then just a little bit of alcohol relieves those problems. So when you get out of the military, whatever that was that you were getting from it, whether it was patriotism, honor, courage, commitment, I don't know what it is for each individual, that's gone. And so then you start to have trouble with, who am I? What am I supposed to be doing? There's no NCO telling me to get my stuff on the truck.
Right.
My purpose in life is not to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy by fire or maneuver, or to repel the enemy's assault by fire in close combat. And
There's the Marine right there.
Yeah, and that's the life that I used to live. Right? It was and in creating like a training schedule, everything had to be aligned and nested toward that objective. Why do we eat at the chow hall? Well, because you have to have fuel in order to be able to locate and close with. Why do we do PT? Why do we do martial arts? Why do we do marksmanship training? All of these things. Well, ultimately, that's the objective. And so when you're out, nobody is telling you that objective anymore. And so in some ways, we trade agency, right? So when I'm in, I have no say over what happens to me, generally speaking. I mean, maybe you can talk to your branch manager or your detailer and massage some orders. Generally speaking, though, it's like that guy who got stuck in Okinawa, nothing you can do about that.
Right.
When you have no agency, that can lead to depression because there's nothing that I can do to change my situation. And so if I start taking that on board as myself, like, well, that's my fault, that can lead to depression. On the other side, though, we have infinite choice. And infinite choice, according to the ancient Greeks, is also oppressive.
Mm-hmm.
Where if I can do anything and nobody is telling me what to do, I may struggle to make a choice. And if I struggle to make a choice, the example I usually use with veterans is like, this is your weekend's coming up. You could go do just about anything. You could go just about anywhere. And then because you're struggling to make that decision, Sunday night comes and then you're pissed at yourself for not having done anything.
Yeah, it's like analysis paralysis.
That's right.
But on a different level.
The two sides of that seesaw, one leading to depression and one leading to anxiety. And a lot of that comes from when you transition out. Because your life was simple enough, and there is no more simple life than being in a combat tour.
Right. I mean, when I was deployed, I didn't have to worry about my bills. Like that, I had set myself up for success, and the only thing that I was concerned about was the mission. When I was on the ground, or whether I was the operations officer or the jock chief, that's all I thought about. I mean, yes, my family was there. At the time I didn't have children, just a wife, but not just a wife, but still, that was the piece that entered my mind occasionally. But the bills were paid. I didn't have to worry about changing the oil in the car. I didn't have to change, the air conditioner filter in my house or any of these stupid little ankle biter things. All I thought about was the mission. So I totally get that, man. When people ask me how difficult deployment was, I was like, yeah, combat is difficult, but the deployment was easy. Yes, we're working long hours, but we had one thing on our mind, and that was it. So I totally understand that.
So with it being Men Talking Mindfulness, I would say that there's probably no more mindful time in your life than having been shot at and missed.
Oh, indeed. I think I've described combat as, horrific, but at the same time, it can be incredibly beautiful. And I know that sounds twisted to say, but again, you're focused on one thing, and so is everyone else around you. And we're all working to save one another. Sure, we may be patriots. We may have joined to defend freedom and fight for our country. But when you're on the battlefield, you're fighting for yourself and for the people right next to you. And there's nothing more beautiful than that right there, which again sounds twisted. But coming to returning from deployment, or maybe getting out from the military, there's a lot of misconceptions about veterans' mental health. Now, I know we've talked about some mental health challenges that veterans, or even those who are still active duty, may have. What are, in your experience, some of the misconceptions about veteran mental health?
So I think that the biggest one, and this is why I try to do outreach, is that we just expect you to turn it off and assimilate. So, we expect that the veteran, whether they've combat deployed or not, that as soon as you do your end of ETS, your end of whatever that is for the Army, or EAS, end of active service, that it's sort of like you get your DD 214 and the next day you're just a civilian like everybody else. And it's as if, nothing has changed. And that's the expectation. And that is very difficult. Then the next problem, or the misconception, is that the assumption becomes that the veteran is broken. There's something wrong with you. So you get like a negative spin attached to it. And that can come even from inside the house. Like it could be your wife or your kids that are saying you're unstable, or you need to go get help, or you need to go get on medications. And the veteran's like, I don't understand what is happening. Most of the major life events, like negative life events, happen within 6 months of getting out of the service.
Wow.
So that's going to be like divorce, suicide attempt, or falling into major depression because of that shift. Which isn't to say that, okay, if you make it past the 6 months, like, we're not talking about prognosis like cancer diagnosis where we have survival rates. Back to the fact that I use the substance abuse model. It's like, if you've been a warrior, you are a warrior forever. So it's like, I'm currently sober from being a warrior, except I'm not, because it's like I still contract and I still talk to my guys, and that's when I feel most like myself.
Sure.
So what I'm trying to do is take the heroin or the opiate or the the fentanyl of combat and step down to like, okay, well, maybe I should become a police officer. Maybe I should do these things because that may ease me into transitioning into being a civilian. Now, the challenge is that I will never assimilate. The behavioral conditioning is so significant and strong that it's unrealistic to expect that somebody who's been through all of that, again, suffice to do basic training, is just going to shut that part of themselves off. Back to kind of like operator syndrome or combat tours, I would say all of those are magnifiers. So the guy who's only done basic training may have an easier time assimilating. The guy who's done basic training and combat tours in a full 20, 30-year career is going to have a lot harder time transitioning. The other challenge that we have with this that I see at the VA is it matters when you start. Because if we grab you at that young age, 17 to 18, that's when you're still developing this identity. And then you can become foreclosed. Like if I joined at 17, I never went out and was a carpenter, rock star, didn't try any of these things. And so I just foreclosed on being a warrior. And then 4 years later, because of X, Y, or Z, I don't do that anymore. But I've concretized that as my identity.
Yeah, and at that age, I mean, your brain is still being rewired. I mean, it's always being rewired, right? But at that age, it's so plastic, right? That neuroplasticity is there, and you just take on that identity. What you're being told to take on, it's much easier to take on as an 18-year-old than it is as a 26-year-old, right?
The misconception or the challenge then, and this exists, I think, within the DoD too, is we figure like all you need to do is get a job. Like if you get a job, everything will be great.
Yeah.
Or if we send you to school, like, oh, well, you get your education, your 4-year degree, then you'll be fine. And it's like that doesn't necessarily work, both in the aspects of how we do it. So we like do skills bridge, and I talk to the skills bridge or the Nexus people, and I'm like, this isn't helpful if you send a guy out on internship to learn some skills, but then you keep bringing them back in. sticking with the substance abuse model, it's like, okay, well, I'm sending you out to get, rehab at some, whatever the company is, like Google, and then I'm bringing you back in and giving you another shot of whatever it is that, hey, you're wearing a uniform again. Hey, you come in and do a PFT.
Right. I did the skill bridge, and I I feel that.
Yeah. So it's like, you're not out. And then they're questioning me. It was like, well, then what are you supposed to do? And I was like, well, if I have 11 of 11 symptoms of substance abuse, then the goal for me would be to go to inpatient therapy or an inpatient rehab place where for however many days it takes, I can clear this sense that I have to be a warrior. Now, a lot of this is we're still figuring this out. And I feel kind of like it doesn't make sense to me that this is, I can see this like a Cassandra complex almost. And other people just will speak around it, but not have that same clarity of thought. Where if you go back to the greatest generation, everybody came back from World War II. Well, everybody was a veteran. And so this was very common. And I dislike the term common sense because that insinuates that we have common experience. Well, when everybody came back from World War II, we generally all had that same common experience. Into Korea, and then less so in Vietnam, when you started to have a big gap between who went and who didn't go.
Right.
And so when those guys came back, nothing made sense. And we've sort of been on that trajectory since. We don't have a place to go, and the people around you don't understand what you've been through or what you've done necessarily. And so they just kind of rely on Hollywood or whatever, and they make assumptions. And there are some guys that will take advantage of that too. Like I've got one sailor patient who says like, don't sneak up on me. I've got PTSD. I could kill you. And I'm like, you're a bosun mate. I don't know if that's actually true that you have the capacity to do that.
Although I'll tell you, some of the toughest people I've ever met are bosun mates.
Yeah, I guess you have to be pretty tough to survive deck division.
That's right.
So what I find though, again, is that it's very difficult to shed that as who you are. And a lot of times we seek at least to then integrate into society. And if we can't integrate, at least we'll be separate, where I'll have veteran friends or I'll hang out with other veterans and I'll do martial things. So I may not be in the military anymore, but I'll do BJJ, or I will, continue to ruck. I'll throw on a weight vest and do a Murph every once in a while.
I'm only laughing because I have this group chat over to the side here with a bunch of, there's probably, I don't know, maybe 50% of them are veterans. And on Memorial Day, they all did the Murph. And through the month of May, they had to do half a Murph until Memorial Day. And so, I get that. The feeling, the desire is there to continue doing something that is martial. I like how you phrase that.
Yeah. The challenge again is in that usually that first 6 months when you get out, when you're just marginalized. So you're not active duty anymore and you have no community. So I'm not assimilated as a civilian. I don't have like a separated veteran place where I can live. And so I'm just marginalized. I don't know what to do. And I saw this comment once, somebody posted like, it's been a year since I got out and my company commander hasn't called me once. And I laughed. At first, I was like, well, why would they? And then I realized that's sort of the problem, is that we don't have we have a long onboarding process, and then we have no exit interview. And so that's what I try to do at the VA now, is I try to do that exit interview. Like, what was the indoctrination process all about? Why is the military like a destructive relationship? And then if it is a destructive relationship, why did you stick around? Which is where the substance abuse piece comes in. What didn't they tell you? What should you know about your time in the military? And then the last one is typically like, why did your family stage an intervention?
Oof. Yeah. I'm trying to think what that intervention would even look like.
Usually it's like, go get help or else.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had the exit explained to me in an analogy. It's like, when we join the military, it's like us climbing aboard a train. And then if you join, an elite group, it's like us transitioning from that regular train to like a speed train, a bullet train. And then when you retire or get out, whenever that may be, it's like you're jumping off that train. And by the time you turn around and you look back, that train is gone. and there's nobody on that train looking for you. And even if they are, they can't find you. They can't see you. And they've got a mission. They've got to continue pushing on that train. And I've always thought that was a really profound analogy, or maybe a metaphor rather. But so what do you suggest people do if they are experiencing this warrior withdrawal?
I like that analogy. And it is interesting to me that is because that's common. I use a very similar one where I usually say, depending on the service that I have, the veterans in my groups, I'll tailor it to theirs, where it's either we put you on an LHA or ship, or we put you on a C-130. And the challenge there is that when you get put on those vehicles or that high-speed train, your job ceases to be to take care of yourself. It becomes, my purpose in life is to make sure this train gets to where it's going, or the ship gets to where it's going, or the plane gets to where it's going. And then when it comes time for me to get out, that's when, I go back to however I got on the ship, whether that's by vehicle, and I realize my vehicle has, dry gaskets, oil's out of it. There's the mice have chewed through the electricity. Or in the C-130, they're shuffling you to the door, and that's when you look at the jump master and say, nobody gave me a parachute, and the jump master says, don't worry about it, the VA will catch you. And it's like, yeah, I'm at the VA and I will catch you with my baseball glove, except I'm on the wrong drop zone.
Oh, wow.
And then I had a Vietnam veteran peer support that I used to work with, and his analogy was very similar. And he said, when you get out of the Army, it's like they kick you out of a moving vehicle straight into a knife fight. So what I would suggest people to do, or the first thing almost always, is you have to get your sleep regulated.
It's foundational, right? For so many things.
If that's not happening, then there's almost nothing else that you can do that will matter. Because if you're not sleeping, you're not getting rest, you're not restoring yourself, and then it becomes a negative recursive formula where the next day is worse than today, and then that next day is worse than the previous day.
Right. And then we're just downing energy drinks to make it through those days, which just make the night times worse.
That's right.
I've been there.
And
the Ripets.
Yeah, that's right. Ripets, and then the Cobras. And then eventually, so if you want to use an analogy here, I'd say going to sleep is like restoring the brake pads on your vehicle. And if you're not doing it, then eventually you have no brake pads and you get metal on metal and you have a catastrophic event. What does a catastrophic event look like? Well, it could be I'm yelling at my kids for something, or it could be I'm yelling at my coworker for something, or, I get aggressive on the highway. Typically, the first thing that I do is to say, you have to get your sleep fixed. And then there's several things that I suggest. I use
real quick, Varpas, what do you do to fix your sleep? I know there's medications that you can take, and some of those medications are worse than the bad sleep. How do you fix your sleep? How do you fix your brake pads? Right?
Yeah. So I just had this conversation with a veteran the other day who's not able to sleep, and I would say there's probably three components to it. The first is there's a physical component. Like, is there a physical reason, like sleep apnea, that's causing me not to have restorative sleep? So you have the sleep test done, see if that's happening. Because again, there's no amount of what you can do in terms of prep work or medication. If the problem is that there's not enough oxygen getting into my system, which causes me to wake up, that has to get repaired. And then if you get a CPAP or something like that, or a BiPAP, and that becomes, then we can move on to perhaps the next level, which is what causes it to be hard for you to fall asleep, and then how often do you wake up in the middle of the night? So waking up in the middle of the night, there's biological reasons, sleep apnea. The second reason may be bad dreams or nightmares. So again, this is a case where there's almost nothing that you can do in prep work for sleep that's going to help you if I'm waking up for nightmares. So there you may have a two-pronged approach of both medications that help you not have the nightmares, and then also talk therapy to figure out why I'm having those nightmares.
Gotcha.
That last piece, then, what's causing me it to take a long time for me to fall asleep, that's going to be usually your mental health, the talk therapy to figure out what that may be, whether it's depression or anxiety, or post-traumatic stress. And then there's also medications that would help with that. There's immediate forms of medication. At the VA at Long Beach, we do the stellate ganglion block.
Mm-hmm. I've done that.
Yeah, suppresses your fight or flight system. And so presumably if that's suppressed, then it's easier. Yeah. So the way I talk about psychotropic medications is it's sort of like bringing you inside the wire. And so the medications may make it easier to sleep. It allows you to rest, refit, re-BZO your rifle, and then most importantly, learn the techniques, tactics, and procedures that you need to succeed outside the wire and rehearse them. So if I have no confidence in mindfulness, if I have no confidence in deep breathing, if I have no confidence in using a paced or progressive muscle relaxation, then when I'm under high stress, I won't be able to use it. And so sometimes the idea of medications is to bring us inside to a place where now I can gain confidence in these skills, where I can use like an ice bucket to slow my respirations and slow my heart rate down. Now, these things don't improve anything. They don't make you feel good or better. They just, stop that from escalating typically.
So then the next step now, once we've kind of calmed our nervous system, we're able to sleep better, whether it's going to sleep or staying asleep, we've kind of got that block figured out. What's the next step?
Yeah, so sleep is a part of an acronym that I like to use. I borrowed it from dialectic behavioral therapy, and I modified it by dragging in from the adolescent handbook. The acronym is PLEASE, PLEASE. So P is we treat physical pain, physical illness. If you're sick, it's harder to regulate emotions. Things just set you off. If my knee is in pain, that also causes stress. And so then when I set my doctor's appointment, the knee pain hasn't changed, and yet I have less stress. So we try to treat physical pain and physical illness. The L is what I borrow from the adolescent handbook. We limit screen time.
Oh, wow.
Both in general and specifically. So in general, almost nothing good comes over your screen, which I say sitting in front of a screen.
Right. It's on this side as well.
Yeah. So we try to limit it. And usually that's going to be things like the news or social media. And then in specifics, 1 hour before you go to bed, because your screen is activating, whether that's text messages, emails, or whatever it is, it's going to be activating for your brain, which then reduces your ability to fall asleep quickly. So the first E is eat a balanced diet. Snickers has their commercial, you're hangry. And we've all experienced low blood sugar. So you try to eat a balanced diet, keep that fuel going. The A is to avoid mood altering substances. So if you're relying on alcohol to put you to sleep or caffeine to wake you up, we try to avoid those, because that's like going into the gym with an exoskeleton and then lifting, 450 pounds on the bench. It's like, well, you didn't do that. The exoskeleton did that. And you want to be strong, so you need to be doing these things without weight belts and all the accoutrement.
Okay, another one that hits hard, because I definitely use my caffeine in the morning, and then I use my C4 pre-workout before hitting the gym. So
right.
I've got to change that A. Come off
potentially, right? So everything's going to be a middle path. Then the S, of course, is sleep. You want your correct amount of sleep. Obviously, this is a little bit challenging when you have duties, responsibilities. If you're a parent, you can look at your kid and force them to get 10 hours of sleep. And then you're like, but I can't do that because I have to wake up for work. And so, we're figuring these things out. And then the last E is exercise, which releases endorphins in and of itself. And then that sort of can also fuel the train for the rest of the piece. If I am exercising, then presumably I'm not on my screen as much. And then presumably I'm not using mood altering substances. And then it's easier for me to fall asleep. I get better sleep. And then we're into that positive recursive cycle. So the thing I love about Please, it's an emotion regulation skill. If I'm attacking all of those, if I'm taking care of those, then presumably I have less depression, less anxiety. And it's also my scoreboard. So if I find I don't want to go to the gym, if I'm not sleeping well, if I have to have extra coffee to wake me up, or I need a nightcap, or I'm using marijuana to help me go to sleep, if I am eating too much, too little, or eating comfort foods, eating is one of the ways that our body is communicating to us. And if I'm eating foods that are like high caloric, high fat, this is an indicator. If I'm doom scrolling on my phone, all of these things are indicators that there's something mental health related as well that we need to examine.
Oh, wow. Okay. So Please, physical. The L is limit screen time. E is eating a balanced diet. A is avoiding the mood altering or mental altering. S, forgive me,
sleep.
Sleep, of course. And then the last E was the
exercise.
exercise.
Yeah.
All right, there we go. So just wanted to rehash that. Wow, that's a great one. I like that. It's easy enough to remember, even though I missed the last two, but
Well,
now I'll remember those last.
right. And so the challenge is when you give that out as advice, it's like, you feel kind of coming back to imposter syndrome. And this goes back to what I was saying before about and discover warrior withdrawal. I'm just putting a name to it, but I feel like an imposter to tell you, hey, do these things that you know you're supposed to do. How do I know that you're supposed to do these things? Because you make your kids do these same things. You got a
Right.
test tomorrow. You better eat a healthy breakfast. Or we would do this with the E1s and E2s. Like, hey, if you got a forced march, then we make you go eat in the dining facility to ensure that you
Right.
ate. And then
Get a good rest.
that's right.
And limit the kids' screen time. I mean, we try to do that as parents. So I've got young kids, and my 8-year-old has just recently discovered a game on the iPad, and she's constantly asking for it. And we're like, no, you've already burned up those minutes today.
Yeah.
So yeah. So basically, using the childhood psychology piece as an adult.
Yeah. So we forget
is
that biologically we're no different. You're still the same biological machine. We've still evolved in the same way. The adult, though, puts themselves in a position of more continued stress. So if you go back to combat, right, if I'm being shot at, presumably that troops in contact expires, and then you feel terrible. You have all the cortisol hits, and then you feel sick, and then you can get back at it. That's really how our body is designed to manage stress. And then you get into the civilian world, and it's just constant stress. Every day I go to the cubicle, stress, and boss this, kids that, all of that. And if this impedes some of that please stuff. And so the please is how we might manage it.
Yeah, I've had people, I'm glad you said that piece about the combat versus civilian stress. I've had people say, well, you were a SEAL. Of course you've dealt with stress higher than what I've dealt. Nobody's shooting at me. But as someone in corporate America, that stress it may not be the acute stress, but it's protracted over weeks, months, years. And there's, other people's livelihood. It may not be their life exactly like on the battlefield, but it's their livelihood. It's their children, having food on the table, that their ability to afford a roof over their head. That's stressful. And then you have a boss with deadlines and projects that have deadlines and budgets that you have to manage. That's stressful. I mean, I always, my retort to people who are like, well, I'm not being shot at as well. Sometimes being on the battlefield is a blessing. So
it's more definable, easier to define.
It is. It's much easier to define. That's probably a better way of putting it.
Which gets back into that please skill. So if you find that I'm struggling with that stuff, that being your scorecard, that's when you re-examine, you ask yourself or explain it to yourself as if you're a 5-year-old. Like, why am I upset right now? Or why am I not able to go to the gym? Because there isn't anybody shooting at me. It's very easy for me to point and say, it's because that guy's shooting at me that I'm under stress.
Right.
And then you need to make it make sense to like a 5-year-old, because then it makes sense to you. And in explaining it as if you're talking to a 5-year-old, you can whittle through a lot of the nonsense, as long as you're honest with yourself, because you can shine on a 5-year-old very easily and say like, oh, it's work stuff.
So that's what you can do for yourself, right? The please piece. And, that I'm assuming includes going out and seeking therapy as well. I mean, it may not be one of the letters in the acronym, but, taking care of yourself physically and psychologically. But what about our friends, our family, our support system? What role can they play in kind of working through or navigating these challenges of post-combat, or maybe not even post-combat, post-military life?
Right. So, as the veteran is taking care of themselves, one of the good things about going to mental health is to talk to somebody because it can be difficult to sort through what is causing this stuff. Some of it, we just have the dissonance we don't know. And some of it is, so dissonance would be like more denial. Like, it's hard for people to admit. I have 70-year-old veterans that for the first time in their lives can say, I wish I was back in Vietnam. And it's not necessarily the shooting at, the Vietnamese. That's what they want. It's that clarity of purpose, that simplicity of life that they miss. It's also that decade of your life, 17 to 25 or so, is going to be the most crystal clear decade for you in terms of memory, probably for the rest of your life. Typically, it's the last 10 years, but then it's those 10 years. So when you're 77, you'll remember your late 60s and 70s, but then the next closest thing that you remember is going to be, hey, my time in Vietnam when I was with, first of the 505th or whatever it is. So understanding that, right? Like understanding what the veteran is going through would be helpful to the family, because especially spouse, kids, they don't understand, and perhaps their perspective is self-centered. Again, the expectation that as soon as you hang up the uniform, well, now I'm going back to the same Varpas that I was before I put the uniform on. It's like, yeah, that doesn't happen that way. It's going to take a minute. And then kids, especially depending on their ages, will have explicitly concrete thought and, self-centered mindset. And so if you come home from work and you're frustrated and you've been trained by going through basic training to have kind of the stoic face, I've been trained to not be emotional, to suppress all of this stuff. And so your kids may sense that there is stress. And so their hypothesis is going to be, it's something I did. And then they'll test their hypothesis and they will do something that will make you upset. And then if you're at the capacity of my rucksack there and the kid, is not showing up on time to dinner, then, the rucksack opens and then it's like collateral damage, everybody. It's all coming out right now.
Yeah. Been there.
Even though the kid had nothing to do with it. And then I will bring that back to like an MOS producing school. So when you're at basic training, you suppress all these emotions, and hopefully you are getting the please skill, generally speaking, and you have no free time. But then when you get to your MOS producing skills, usually when you start to have a little bit more autonomy. And so then you have barracks brawls, where for some insufficient event, like somebody ate MRE crackers on my rack, and then that turns into a fist fight with my battle buddy, right? Same dude I jump on a grenade for, I'm now fist fighting him. And then as soon as the fist fight's over, it's like, we're good again.
Right.
Because that's the piece that then explodes everything else. The fact that I was knife-handed by the first sergeant, the leading the chief petty officer, and then I got called all of these things. And then I saw that from the other side too, because you have like an E1 or an E2 who did a 20K movement, and then they say my feet hurt, and you look down at their boots and the left boot is on the right foot and the right boot is on the left foot, and your brain just goes into a space like I don't even know what to do here with this. And so you take, we use mindfulness, right? I preach mindfulness. Yep. So in this case, it would be a distress tolerance skill, right? Stop, take a step back, observe, and proceed mindfully.
Right.
And so
we
good,
teach that.
Yeah. For family as well as the veteran, the veteran's like, hold on. And in interpersonal challenges. So I like describing it this way as well, is the veteran is been conditioned to respond to attacks with violence. So if you make an accusation at me, I'm going to make a counter accusation at me, or figurative. So that's figuratively, it's like if you throw a grenade at me, I'm going to catch it, examine it, throw it back at you, and then I'm going to follow up with a couple more of my own frags. And so we escalate this argument. And the challenge there is that I try to help veterans, and then also, I guess, by proxy, family members understand that the fuse in the grenade that is thrown is your capacity for mindfulness. So if somebody throws a grenade at you and I catch it, and I have done my please skills, and I have been mindful, then that is not a 3 to 5 second fuse. That can be a 2 to 3 minute fuse. And I can fully examine this thing and decide whether or not, hey, I can replace the spoon. I can put the pin back in. I can put the thumb clip back on, and I can set it down. I don't need to deal with that. I recognize that for what it was. If I haven't been doing emotion regulation skills, if I haven't been doing mindfulness, when that grenade gets tossed at me, I may even throw it back with the pin still in, because it is so toxic to me to get attacked. And then, I'll be sure to, muscle memory, throw mine back. And that's how it starts with, you didn't do this. Well, you didn't do that. Well, and escalation.
I've definitely caught and thrown many of those grenades.
Yeah. So here I use a little bit of misogyny too, especially with veterans, and say, like, you consider yourself to be the stronger person. So you should be able to jump on that grenade.
Wow.
Otherwise, you're not the stronger person, right?
Stronger person, as the veteran, as the parent, I mean, that's where my grenade fuse is the shortest, admittedly so, and shamefully so, is with my children. That's where my patience is tested all the time, and they know how to push my buttons. But
Yeah, we're all learning
when I am,
computers.
yes,
So
and
why does
yes,
your
and
kid do the thing that annoys you? Because it works.
yeah,
You want it to change, you got to change as a response.
maybe we should talk more. So, okay, so we've talked about what the veteran can do. We've talked about what the family can do. What resources? I mean, I know you're working with the VA. What resources are out there for veterans or active duty again who are seeking assistance with this warrior withdrawal?
So the VA is a great place to start, and you can get a lot of this taken care of, but you get a lot of the mental health issues sorted through the VA. Sometimes, depending on where you're at, there may be vet centers. I just took a position with Operation Shield on the board. So there are nonprofits that try to get, especially with Operation Shield, veterans that are transitioning linked to mental health providers to sort of bridge this gap, because it can take some time as you're transitioning out to get, I forget what it's called, when you get enrolled with the VA. And then between the time that you get enrolled with the VA, and then you get your primary care provider, and then you get your first mental health intake, and it could be almost a year. And so, try to bridge some of that gap to get guys and gals to providers to see somebody to talk through some of these things, especially in that tight first 6-month window where you no longer have your active duty community. Your family,
Having
civilian
assimilated,
counterparts expect you to just go right back to being average Joe. And
right?
that's when you're out on that island. So that's when you're free falling out of that C-130 with no parachute. And you're like,
Somebody catch me in your baseball glove.
that's right. Yeah.
All right. Well, so for you personally, looking ahead, what are your goals for kind of growing that awareness of this warrior withdrawal syndrome and the support specifically for this? I mean, again, we've got support for operator syndrome, we've got support for PTSD and a lot of these other mental health challenges. What do you envision as support specifically for this in the future?
Yeah. So, support, that's why I wrote the book. And that's why I go out and give talks and go on podcasts, is to increase the awareness, especially with then getting people over the stigma of starting to talk to somebody. And I listened to the Jocko podcast that you did, and he's never been to therapy and is kind of curious about what it is. And that's
Yeah.
one of the reasons that I say, like, okay, well, then don't use the word therapy. I'm not a therapist. You need retraining. You've been trained in a particular way. You were trained to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy. And now that's not your mission set anymore. And so you need some retraining. And the DoD didn't give it to you. So who can give you this retraining? Well, someone at the VA can, or someone at one of these mental health nonprofits might be able to. And it's helpful if you can use the same language. So I'll stick with that podcast again. And you guys are talking about the front sight post, and I often use marksmanship as an example of mindfulness, because if you're going to shoot a 10-round magazine, you fire your first, you get your bone support, your muscle relaxation, your push-pull with the pistol grip and the buttstock, and your cheek weld, eye relief from the rear side aperture, and then you breathe in and you breathe out. And if you like what you see, weapon system goes on fire, and it's a slow, steady trigger squeeze. And you send that round down range. If it's a known distance range, right, your weapon system goes back on safe load, let it hang, and then you repeat the process again for the second round. Bone support, muscle relaxation, good tight grip, everything. Breathe in and you breathe out. And if you don't like what you see, you don't muscle it onto the target.
Right.
You start from the base and build back up.
Reset.
Breathe in, breathe out. And when that weapon system goes on fire, the only thing that's in your mind is a crisp, clear front sight post bisecting the target in half and a slow, steady trigger squeeze. At that moment, you don't know if you have to replace the air filter at your house. You have no idea if you're married or not. You don't know if Travis Kelce is dating Taylor Swift. The only thing in my mind is crisp, clear front sight post bisecting the target in half. For that round, it doesn't matter where the last round went. I have no clear idea how many rounds are left in my magazine either. That's mindfulness. That's active mindfulness.
I love that.
Translates to, so some guys don't do marksmanship. I'll say, like, well, do you play golf? Did you play baseball? Every single time that you step up to the plate or you step up to the ball, it is the same process. And if you're shanking the ball, if I'm shooting a flyer, then that's indicative of I'm not being mindful. And so I have to reset everything. And so what is my marksmanship? What is my shooting position? It is a body scan. Body scan is a type of mindfulness practice.
Sure.
What is my gaining my sight alignment, sight picture, my natural point of aim? Well, that's a breathing exercise. Well, I can do that. What is slow, saying to myself, slow, steady trigger squeeze? That's a mantra. I can give myself a mantra. Can't walk around town slow, steady trigger squeezing at everybody. Got to come up with a new one.
Maybe that is your mantra.
Yeah, I hope not. And then, but what is the focusing on the front sight post? That is a hyperfixation on a particular sense. So these are active mindfulness skills that you can take and you can generalize. So another one that I'll use is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. List 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can, every way you want to go through the senses, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And usually by the time you're in the smell, it's like you're a bloodhound or a bloodhound dog, like, sniffing around because I'm a mission focused guy and I have to get 2. I have to get 2. But when I have to get those 2, it's like, again, who's the quarterback of the Eagles? I don't know. It doesn't matter.
That's the one I use to go back to sleep at night because that's where I struggle. I don't struggle falling asleep. I can fall asleep at the drop of a hat in the evening, but somewhere along the line, something is going to wake me up, whether it's something that I dreamt about or a noise or something. And then I'm wide awake. And then my mind starts racing about, did I change the air filter? Did I put new oil in the truck and this kind of stuff? And I do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And that, again, by the time I'm at 2, I'm normally asleep again. So
that's the
because
benefit.
I don't care.
And the benefit of mindfulness, kind of like being in the moment, is it sets up those firewalls from the past and the future. And so oftentimes when I give self-report measures and intakes, there's a depressive questionnaire, there's an anxiety questionnaire. So when they complete the depressive one, I say that. So depression is sort of like taking the pain from the past, all the shoulda, woulda, couldas, all the regrets that I may have, and I drag that into the present and I drop it on top of my head and increase my current level of suffering. And so we do need to have some sadness because otherwise we can't experience joy. So a lot of sadness then becomes depression, and we notice it because it's impacting how I'm behaving now. And so if depression is dragging pain from the past, and anxiety or worry would be dragging possible pain from the future and bringing that into the present. So all the things that I might have to do tomorrow, or, who the president is going to be or whatever it is. And I'm dragging all of that and forcing myself to experience the suffering now. And so the challenge too with veterans is, well, you're a professional sufferer.
Right.
You don't get through basic training not learning how to be a professional at suffering. And so our habit is to take all of those things, and then not only can I suffer, I will take your pain, spouse, I will take your challenges, kids, anxiety, and I will take all of that, except our coping skill, again, is to take all that suffering and shove it down.
Right.
And not attend to it until the brakes are gone and we have metal on metal.
And there is a catastrophic event. Or, I guess. Well, Varpas, this has been phenomenal for those who are listening or watching later, and they want to get a hold of you or learn more about you. What's the best way for them to do that?
Probably the best way, I guess, is I'm on Instagram now and on X as Dr. Varpas, DrVarpas. Having come from USASOC, I had no online
Yeah. I get it.
presence on purpose. And so now I'm starting to do that. I'm also on LinkedIn as Varpas de Sa Pereira. And then I have actually fielded calls from veterans in other states at my VA. And I say, you should go to your local VA because unfortunately I can only work locally.
Well, thank you for the work that you are doing. Thank you for sharing this, Varpas. This has been, again, phenomenal information. And I know somebody out there needs to hear this, whether it's a veteran themselves, whether it's a family member or friend, colleague. This has been tremendously helpful, Varpas. So thank you so much. Any closing words before we say goodbye?
No, sir. Hopefully this helps somebody out there. And if you can save one, the starfish, then that's the goal.
That's right. That's right. Amen, brother. Amen. Well, thank you again. And for the audience, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, take care, everyone.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you walk away with some new tools and insights to guide you on your life journey. New episodes are being published every week, so please join us again for some meaningful discussion. For more information, please check out mentalkingmindfulness.com.